to try to give a bit of context to what we're going to be talking about, uh, the whole issue of doing less harm, risk reduction, uh, which we've just heard some wonderful overviews on. Uh, it's an area where the cigarette smoking has just uh, such huge potential because we've known since at least the 1970s that though people smoke to get nicotine, they're dying because of the smoke. So the potential has always been great. And interestingly, because most of you haven't been around this issue as long as I have, this didn't used to be controversial about cigarette smoking. There was no problem getting a harm reduction section into a law in the 1980s that I was involved in. Uh, and it was actually seen as something that would lead us to being able to get a better approach to risk reduction on illicit products, and the idea that everybody could identify with smokers, but people would have trouble identifying with IV drug users or sex workers. Uh, Interestingly, that's probably changed, where there's now far greater acceptance in many areas to do harm reduction on illicit drugs and less openness to doing harm reduction on nicotine. I think it's an interesting sociological uh, situation that we've got ourselves into. But in this session, what we're trying to do is look at what's really going on at the front line on nicotine and understanding the important issue of substitution. Can people move from one product to another, as we've seen in the history of risk reduction, of moving from more risky to less risky things? We want to understand what's going on at the store face, the vape shop, the real situation of real people and what's happening. And we want to understand what's happening legally, because the law, court interventions have played a huge role in the history of risk reduction in Canada and other countries, things like the Insight case here in Canada. So for this uh, part of the conference, we have Anindya Sen, Professor of Economics at the University of Ottawa, who's going to be talking about substitution. We have Maria Papaioannoy-Duic, I hope I got the name almost right, who's going to be talking about the standpoint of a vape shop owner, a vapor, an advocate for vaping. What's the experience like trying to deal with this in Canada now? And we've got Pascal Thibeault from our Center for Health Law Policy and Ethics here at the University of Ottawa, who's going to be looking at the legal aspect of this. So I'll pass it on to Professor Sen to talk about the role of substitution and looking what happens when JUUL comes into a market. What goes on with cigarette sales? Professor Sen.
Great. Let me just see. Okay, thank you so much for that introduction, David. And David, I'm just confirming with you that you can see my slides.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, great. So I'll start off. So I have 15 minutes. And so I'll preface my presentation by saying that I'm really excited to be here today presenting my research. I think being able to present with a cross-section with individuals who are from a cross-section of society, academic and non-academic, it's really neat, and it's something which is long coming, and it should be a great session. So the title of my talk today is The Impact of JUUL Market Entry on Cigarette Sales, Evidence of store level sales declines from Canada. And so this research was done with Yinging Zhu and Shivani Prakash, who are in the Health Economics and Policy Research Department in JUUL Labs. And I myself am a professor of economics from the University of Waterloo. And just a disclaimer that I did not accept any research funding or consulting fee from JUUL to conduct this research, and this presentation has not been reviewed or approved by JUUL Lab. Okay, so what is the basic idea? In terms of the basic idea, the big picture is that we know that electronic nicotine delivery systems, or ENDS as they're called, are alternative products for adult smokers to switch away from cigarettes. And they're non-combustible substitute, and they deliver nicotine through vapor. Okay, so they're designed and intended to compete with the cigarettes, but without the smoke from burning tobacco. So the idea is that by delivering a nicotine experience that competes with that of cigarette smoking, The supposition is that smokers who are unable to quit can substitute their cigarette consumption away, um, with these non-combustible products. So there's an emerging body of research, and different policy agencies have concluded that ENDS products, while not harmless, significantly reduce a smoker's exposure to toxic and cancer-causing chemicals, and can be accessed by adults as a less harmful alternative to smoking. In terms of research on the effects of ENDS products, there's a good deal of recent research which suggests that the use of ENDS products are correlated with reduced cigarette consumption. And that's good from the perspective of harm reduction. David himself has done some recent work in this area, looking at national level data from Japan. But it's important to acknowledge that there's not a consensus in the literature. There is research which suggests that the use of ENDS products are associated with smoking initiation among youth. And my colleague at the University of Waterloo, Dave Hammond, has done a lot of good research in this area. And when you look at Canadian research as a whole, there's still a relative lack of research on the population level impact of the introduction of ENDS products. Most studies utilize self-reported behavioral survey data. There's not a lot of empirical studies that provide causal evidence on the impact of the market entry of ENDS or other alternative products. And that's the niche of this paper. So how we try to contribute to literature is that we are granted access to sales data by a large convenience store retailer that shall remain anonymous. And what we're trying to utilize is that we're trying to utilize exogenous variation. So basically what we're trying to do is we're looking at differences in the timing of entry of JUUL through this retailer in different cities across Canada. And in doing so, what we're getting at is trying to understand is that once JUUL products started appearing, what was their effect on sales of convenience store retailers in that city with respect to cigarettes? In the social sciences, this is close to what we have, close to a natural experiment. It's definitely not a perfect natural experiment, and I won't get into why, but it provides some interesting variation to study. And given that we have data on different markets across the country, we're basically comparing what happens in one market across others, trying to make sure that we're getting some sort of consistent effect across different markets, as opposed to some random results in a limited number of markets. So that's important. And to the point is that our data are at the month level. And what we do is that we use data from 2017 to 2019. And 2017 to 2018 is the it's essentially before the entry of JUUL, and 2018 to 2019 is post-JUUL entry. And we have data at the store level for cigarette sales, and we have data by volume and by value. And the data set is quite rich. It includes more than 600 stores in 153 cities and towns throughout the country. But basically, to be clear, in 5 provinces. So Alberta, British Columbia, Manitoba, Ontario, and Saskatchewan. And of these, the vast majority were in the big cities: Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Victoria, Saskatoon, and Regina. hence we have a very, what I would term as a very robust data set in order to make some inferences. So as I said, the time period for this study was January 2017 to August 2019. And when you add up the number of stores for each province, we basically have about 20,000 observations, a bit more than 19,000 observations in our data set. And what we're trying to do is that we create a variable, it's called a dummy variable, a binary variable, 1, 0. So 1 denotes when JUUL entered the market and allows us to understand the incremental effect of JUUL entry on cigarette sales for each store in our data set. Okay, and as I said before, the unit of observation for outcome variable is basically monthly cigarette sales at the store level. Okay, and we converted the sales into cartons by taking a measure of 200 sticks per carton. This is just a bit of notation to give you an idea of our equation. So the equation we estimate is the dependent variable is the natural log of cigarette sales. So that's the mathematical transformation in order to smooth out the data. And what we're looking at, the key variables are a 1, 0 variable when JUUL entered the market, and this is market share of JUUL. And we also control for other factors, because there are other factors which of course affect the sale of cigarettes independent of JUUL entry. You look at cigarette prices, consumer price index, the local unemployment rate from census data, gasoline prices, temperature, so on and so forth. So we have those controls on the right-hand side. And so what I'll do in order to show you my results, I will now share my Word document, which is just easier to present empirical results. Sorry, wrong one. Okay. So David, I'm just confirming you can see my Word document now. Okay, that's great, thank you. So here's an interesting picture. This kind of summarizes the variation. And if you look at it, the blue line is 2017, 2018 sales, and this is 2018 and 2019 sales, that's a red line. So these are monthly sales, average across each store in a data set. And this shows you the typical cycle of sales for cigarettes, which is well documented. I mean, cigarette sales tend to go down when it's cold, but tends to go up when it gets warmer. And what you see is that relative to the earlier time period, what you see here is that 2018 and 2019 sales of cigarettes, average cigarette sales, average across each store, are lower than the preceding year. So this is when JUUL is in the market, and this is before, when JUUL was not in the market. So the question is that this gap we can see out here, is it because of JUUL entry? And so that's why we use an advanced statistical methodology to understand the reason for this gap, because there are other factors that could be responsible for declining cigarette sales relative to the preceding year, which have nothing to do with JUUL. Okay, so when you estimate the model, I'll just show you these results. They basically summarize everything. And what the first, so the dependent variable in this column is the volume of cigarette sales. Here's the value of cigarette sales. And this is for our entire data, urban and rural. And here it's just for urban areas. And in statistical exercises, what we want to know if the model is fitting the data well. So we use something called an R-square, and the closer it is to 1, the better it is. So when you look at this row, you see that it's quite high. So that is very reassuring. It tells us that the model we've chosen fits the data very well. And here are the key results, that Well, when you look at the city entry variable, the stars mean that they're statistically significant. You hear this in, for example, elections all the time. Was a sample statistically significant? So it's a similar idea, whether it's reliable or not. So these estimates are very reliable. They're significant at the 1% level. And in simple English, what this means is that on average, JUUL entry in a city is associated with a 2% reduction in cigarette sales on average across all convenience stores, okay? And we're kind of tweaking the model, we still get the same result. So that's pretty strong evidence out there. And this is controlling for other factors that occurred at the same time, which can also affect cigarette sales in the market. The other variable of interest is our market share variable. So what this market share variable is that we've taken all vaping products in a store, taken the sales value, divided by the sales value of cigarettes and all vaping products. So what is the share of vaping products in the store? And as the share of vaping products go up, you can see that the negative sign tells you that the cigarette sales are going down. So the point of using these two different measures is that one tells us that this is a citywide effect and this is a local effect. And in both instances, we see that these measures, which are intended to capture rising e-cigarette vaping sales, are correlated with lower cigarette sales, and that's a substitution effect. So my time is running out, and one thing which I'll just end on is that the question is that where is this effect coming from? And when we looked at our data, the vast majority of e-cigarette sales are coming from JUUL. So it's unsurprising that the results in this row are actually mirroring the results out here. Okay, so that's the gist of my research. And in conclusion, what this is a bit preliminary, but we're quite confident in what we're getting. And what it seems to show is that the contribution here is looking at sales data as opposed to survey data. And sales data is pretty indicative of a market-wide impact. And what you're seeing across the country at the convenience store level, right? We don't have gas stations here, but at the convenience store level, as people are buying more e-cigarettes and as JUUL entered the market, you see cigarette sales going down on average across all these convenience stores across the country. And I think that's pretty robust evidence of a substitution effect. So that's 9:45, right? So I'm perfectly on time, David. You seem very happy.
All right. Hey, I'm just a happy sort of person. Yeah, thank you very much for that. I don't think it's surprising for people working in other areas of risk reduction to see a substitution effect. And what's seen in the JUUL data that we've just been presented is very much what we're seeing in other countries, including the research I've been involved with in Japan, but whether we look at Sweden, Iceland, Norway, Korea, the US data is very good. And certainly in Canada, when we can actually find data. I think it's very interesting that tobacco companies do not like releasing data that's showing how rapidly cigarette sales go down when there's alternatives. I think that says a whole lot in terms of vested interest. It makes a whole lot of sense. So having heard the academic part of this, I want to move to Maria to talk about the lived experience of people who are running shops, not convenience stores that are selling all sorts of things, but shops specifically selling vaping products. Maria, over to you.
Hello, thank you, David. Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Papaioannoy-Duic. Today, I've been given the opportunity to discuss vaping and bring attention to the important role that vape shop owners and users of vaping technology can bring into the creation of productive and impactful vaping regulations in this market. But due to systemic exclusion by tobacco control, public health, and regulators, in these conversations, former smokers that use vaping technologies are facing the real possibility of returning to smoking because of impossible regulations that do not put them into the equation. Vaping in Canada is regulated as a consumer product. What that means is it cannot be marketed as a smoking cessation product. If you look on the Health Canada website, you will find the following statements. Completely replacing cigarette smoking with vaping will reduce your exposure to harmful chemicals. There are short-term general health improvements if you completely switch from smoking cigarettes to vaping products. Vaping is less harmful than smoking. Many of the toxic and cancer-causing chemicals in tobacco and the tobacco smoke forms when tobacco is burned. All positive statements, all statements that if you look at the trajectory of vaping regulations in our country, you would be led to believe that Health Canada is being ignored. Personally, I smoked from the time I was 14 till 39. That's 25 years. That is like almost half my life. It was in 2010 that my husband and I discovered vaping and have been smoke-free since then. In 2013, we decided we wanted to help other people stop smoking the same way we did through vaping technology, and we had the opportunity to open one of the very first vape shops in Canada. In the last 7 years, I've had the privilege of helping thousands of people stop smoking, and more importantly, I've helped many others use their voice to fight for fair access to this life-saving product. I've organized numerous protests across the country, launched campaigns to push back against the misinformation about vaping, spoke at government committee meetings about vaping regulations. My proudest moment, however, was helping lead a campaign and having over 23,000 postcards sent to Health Canada from vapers across this country in support of continued access to flavored vaping products. I have and I will continue to support vaping advocacy organizations right across this country. I believe the more voices that are heard, the better. Currently, I am teaming up with Rights for Vapers, and it's an organization of vaping advocates that are dedicated to the advancement of Canadian-based research on vaping. Dr. Chris Lalonde is our academic advisor, and you can head over to our website. I just wanted to give that a little plug because it's really important to me. Through all my experiences, initiatives, I've learned one thing: support for vaping harm reduction as a tool sits inside an echo chamber. Currently our allies are few and far between, and those that do stand up for this life-saving tool are ostracized and shamed by the very organizations that are fighting for the eradication of tobacco-related illnesses. Here's the thing, I do not believe that the electronic cigarette is the true disruptor of the tobacco and tobacco control industry. It's actually the independent vape shops who are the true disruptor. We encroach upon both the pharmaceutical and the tobacco industries in the battle to win the smoker over to their side. And we are winning. Since the introduction of vaping into the Canadian market in 2010, independent vape shops have played a vital role in helping Canadian smokers quit by transitioning to vaping. We are pioneers of this industry. We have helped hundreds of thousands of Canadians quit smoking by not only providing them products, but by offering a community of support and non-judgmental, peer-based counseling services. This model stands apart from government-sponsored, medicalized, and pharmaceutical models of tobacco cessation, and we offer unique advantages. However, this space, our space, is under threat by regulations, and our community of representatives have been excluded, and we have had our lived experiences excluded from policy discussions. Since the introduction of the Tobacco and Vaping Products Act, people like me, vape shop owners, have been labeled as a tobacco company. This obvious, purposeful, and unsubstantiated label has systemically excluded us from conversations. Look, I'm going to be honest, when I was first called a tobacco company, and when I was called a tobacco company just a couple of weeks ago, I'm just always in shock. Like, I am not a tobacco company. I'm doing everything I can to shut down the tobacco companies. But, and you know, you think, are they kidding? But they're not kidding. This convenient addition to the tobacco control lexicon has created a wall to systemically exclude any conversation about the adult smoker and their experience in policy conversations. For the last few years, I have continued to experience the canceling out from tobacco control. Most recently, I registered to attend a conference as an attendee, and the day before the event, my registration was canceled. Based on the communication I received from the chair, and I truly appreciate that the chair took the time, and he was the head of the steering committee, to thoughtfully explain to me their position of excluding me and anyone in the independent Canadian industry. It seems that they enacted a policy. And I quote from the email that they sent me: unfortunately, because of the long history of the tobacco industry confounding tobacco control efforts and the move by the tobacco industry to infiltrate and take control of the vaping industry, there is a lack of willingness to allow individuals who have a link to the vaping industry, even as an independent retailer, to be involved with knowledge exchange events such as the forum. Okay, so what do? I decided to look up the entire steering committee list and send everybody an email to get better understanding. However, the most shocking discovery for me was when I looked at the list and saw that a member of this steering committee, a steering committee that supported systemic exclusion of people like me in the conversation of tobacco control, was also an employee of the very body that creates regulations for our industry, Health Canada. That is a problem when Health Canada is part of a committee that supports not hearing my voice. That is somewhere where we need changes. The state of vaping nicotine in Canada is moving away from a progressive set of balanced regulations where the smoker needs were always considered, to a more prohibitive set of regulations at federal, provincial, and municipal levels. Across Canada, it is becoming much more difficult to not only access vaping products, but also to find support for smokers wanting to make the switch. Public health and anti-smoking advocates have convinced regulators across Canada that vaping is just as bad, if not worse, than smoking. Ignoring Health Canada. Nicotine caps, flavor bans, and excessive taxation are being implemented in provinces like Nova Scotia, Alberta, PEI, Newfoundland, British Columbia, with very little, if any, consultation with consumers and industry members. A vape shop is one of the few places that a smoker can walk in and not feel shame for smoking. As a society, we've created zero safe places for smokers. Vape shops fill that gap. When smokers first walk into a vape shop, into my vape shop, they are in most cases being assisted by a former smoker. We offer peer-to-peer support, and that is our biggest asset. We offer education and support and more care towards our customers than any other industry. Why? Because we get it. We were all smokers. On average, we can spend up to 1 hour with a new vapor so we can help them learn everything they need to know to set themselves on a successful path. We also provide ongoing support to all our customers, whether that be helping them remove that really tough one cigarette or troubleshooting their device. I can't share how many times I've helped someone turn on their device because they forgot how to do it. Regulations with exorbitant taxation that bans flavors, limits bottle sizes, and puts caps on nicotine levels will cause vape shops to close, and former smokers will lose the safe and supportive environment that help keep them smoke-free. Vapers will return to smoking. We only need to look at Nova Scotia to bear witness of regulations that were driven by tobacco control and disparage the Nova Scotian vapers' voice. According to a recent poll, 29% of vapers will return to smoking. One of the biggest drivers of this en masse return to smoking is the prohibitive regulations that were imposed in that province. A flavor ban, a nicotine cap, and a 20% taxation, the trifecta of prohibition through regulations. If we were included, we wouldn't be looking at smoking rates increasing for the first time in decades. But we're not part of the conversation. The thing that I fear the most is that nothing will be learned from this example. What we have learned, though, from Nova Scotia is it is essential that any government regulatory process thoughtfully and purposefully includes the vaping industry and the end user into the conversation and implementation of any regulations. We can no longer stand by and allow to be painted by the same brush as our predecessors, the tobacco industry. Every single vapor should be acknowledged as a former smoker and be given an opportunity to share their voice. Vape shop owners have a unique set of skills and backgrounds that share real experiences and actionable measures that can work to help smokers remove cigarettes from their lives. Removing a key peer support option can be detrimental in creating a smoke-free Canada. Again, I ask you, just look at Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Those of you who come from other areas of risk reduction or are interested in it will see incredible parallels here. I mean, this is what Maria is saying is very similar to what we've experienced early in the days of AIDS campaigns, with people saying they're fighting this. And if you ask them, have you ever been to a gay bar or a bathhouse? They say, no way, I wouldn't go there. People who were dealing with illicit drugs, who would never talk to the people who are using illicit drugs. And the experience now, and I see experience it regularly with colleagues who are abstinence only on nicotine, don't believe vaping is helping anybody, but absolutely refuse to talk to people who vape or go into a vape shop. That goes against basic principles of public health about meeting people where they are, understanding their lived experience, empowering people to make better personal health decisions. It also goes against the things that work so well in public health, which is really about being a medical detective. Look at all the evidence that's out there. Try to understand what's going on. In this case, we've got some really bad detective work going on where people who are making assumptions that are simply incorrect. That it's the tobacco industry that's benefiting from vaping, when in fact cigarette companies have seen their stock prices fall by more than half since the advent of vaping, because it destroys the business model, underpins the success of that industry. So pay attention to the sorts of things that Maria is saying. For anybody who's interested, talk to vapors. Go into the shop, see who's there. I learn stuff every time I do that. And having seen what Maria's going through and regulations that make it much harder for people like Maria to help people get off cigarettes brings up the whole issue of law. And what are the constraints on regulation imposed by things like our Constitution? And for that, I'll ask Pascal to talk about the experience in Quebec, where there were quite draconian laws brought forward that really limited access to vaping, and they were challenged. Pascal?
Thank you, David. I'll start real quick by sharing my screen here. Give me a quick second. All right, can you give me a thumbs up if you're good, David? All right, perfect. I'll try to go a bit quickly so we have as much time as possible for the Q&A, but I would like to encourage everyone to start typing your question for the previous presenter if you have any there. I just want to start also with a quick disclaimer. I do not have any financial conflict of interest or financial ties with the vaping industry. However, I felt it was important to disclose that I have a couple of friends in the Quebec Vaping Association and the CVA. And also that like while that presentation is going to be in English, everything was in French. So I spent quite a good amount of time to translate everything. So, and I try as much as possible to stay close to the meaning, stay close to the exact wording, but obviously things can get lost in translation. So I'd just like to start here first with the conclusion, actually. And the reason I like to do that is because it's quite a voluminous decision here. We have 77 pages. We have 100 of documents and report. I'd like to cover a lot of ground quickly and just make sure that like you understand where the judge went, which is going to allow you to see maybe like, you know, which of the testimony of like the expert he gave some more weight or not. So in one sentence, in the end, we can say like, you know, the Vaping Association won, but there's a big caveat to that, which will come back in the real end here. So based on the table that the judge built in the decision, I've built one for you to help you kind of like visualize and understand what was at stake here. So just a couple of like things that you're going to see in those ones after that. So QVA is for the Quebec Association, which is also including Valérie Galland. The CVA is for the Canadian one. If you see something in bold, that means that like both association made that point in front of the tribunal. What's very important here from a legal perspective are going to be those letters here. So like the C, S, E, and UV. So it's quite an easy one. So C mean it's a constitutional argument. S mean that like we're alleging a violation of the right to security of the person. E is the right to expression, and UV will be an excessive and arbitrary restriction unrelated to the objective of the law here. So if you look at that slide here, all of those were put forward and brought forward by the Quebec Vaping Association, except number 4, which was both of them. If I go real quickly over some of them, so the first one, they had an issue with the fact that like we equate electronic cigarette and tobacco. The second one, that definition of smoking included electronic cigarette. The third one, that like the law was adding new non-smoking laws in non-smoking areas, including a 9 meters zone adjacent to certain buildings. 4, the prohibition on renting out an electronic cigarette. 5, the prohibition to sell electronic cigarette associated with another product. And 6, this one is quite interesting because the Quebec government put in the law, they kept an option to ban flavors that were non-tobacco flavors. In the end, if we look from a legal perspective, there's really like, you know, quite of like 3 main arguments that the Quebec Vaping Association brought up. Number 1 will be that like Quebec do not have the constitutional jurisdiction to legislate as they did. Number 2 will be that some of the restriction here are infringing on the right to security or integrity of persons, thereby violating the fundamental right recognized by the charters. And lastly, that other articles here or section violate the right to freedom of expression contained in the charter. You're going to see the next slide looks quite different to the previous one, and there's a good reason for that. The highlighted one are the one that the judge ruled in the favor, and the other ones were not. So if we look here, obviously we go back, we see it's like a lot of the things that were put forward by the QVA were not accepted by the judge, except that first one here on the second page. And a lot of the ones that were brought up by the CVA were accepted by the judge. So if you look at the one that like were ruled in the favor of the Vaping Association, we have specifically at 6.42 of the regulation, which has been rendered inoperative insofar as it prohibits vaping advertisement aimed at smoker solely if it's aimed at cessation of tobacco use. So you see here, there's the little E in the end. So that's obviously the right to expression here that like the judge attached that to, which is the same thing for 12, 13, and 14, which again were attached to prohibition of vaping advertising aimed at smokers if it's done in a way that it's aimed at cessation of tobacco use. If we look here at 8 and 9, so those one have the little s, so that's their right to security here. So the judge felt that like it wasn't acceptable to ban smoking or vaping in cessation clinic or at the point of sale here. If we look at the last one here, 15 is once again the right to expression, and it's related to advertising here, and the last two, which were allowed the vape shop to sell other product, were not ruled in their favor. I'd like to spend some time on the experts here. So the judge kind of like grouped his experts in 3 groups and individually address their points. So the group number 1 was the vaping and tobacco medical experts. The second group were physicians with public health expertise. And the third group were 2 university professors, 1 expert in advertising in the context of tobacco, and our moderator here, David Sweener, who's an expert in anti-smoking legislation. I'll spend maybe a bit more time on the first 2 because I do feel that the judge gave a lot of weight to their testimony here. So the first one was Dr. Gaston Ostegui, who is a big proponent of e-cigarette as an alternative to smoking. He was quite critical of the fact that the amending act was preventing the in-store test, and also the fact that like we couldn't, make statement around the fact that like vaping is less harmful than tobacco. He put a lot of like emphasis on harm reduction, and he made the point that like if smokers cannot get rid of nicotine, they should at least stop smoking the deadly smoke that emanates from it. If we look at the second expert here, which was an expert of the defense here. So Dr. Desjardins here said he was quite skeptical about harm reduction strategy in general, and in particular in the context of e-cigarette. So that is quite interesting where that's where you're putting the discussion, right? Like if we make a parallel here, it's like if I say that like electric cars are important for global warming, but you tell me you don't really believe in global warming, we can't really advance a discussion on electric car here, right? So if you reject the idea of like harm reduction being a strategy that like, can work or is valid or valuable, we cannot like, advance forward and like then even have any kind of like, substantive discussion on e-cigarette. Dr. Desjardins here argued that we must develop evidence-based legislation, and he was quite a strong advocate for the approved cessation method and the prohibition, which is like, total cessation of activity. So like, don't smoke cigarette, don't vape, just like, stop, which was echoed by Dr. Horacio Arruda, who also was one of the person who gave a testimony during the trial, which is also the person right now who's handling the COVID-19 crisis out in Quebec. The second group of experts were also physicians. So we had Dr. Jacques Lepouzec from France, who's a big proponent of vaping as a means to stop smoking. We had Mark Tyndall, which well-known in BC, and who said that if we're not gonna ban regular cigarette, which he pegged as the ideal scenario, we should try to promote a safer alternative here. And we had lastly, the expert of the defense here, who was Dr. Robert Schwartz, who opposed the principle of harm reduction and the principle of precaution there. And he argued that the public strategy shouldn't put the non-smoker at risk. However, he did agree that in-store testing was reasonable. And in his analysis, like the judge confirmed that like this admission had to be taken into account as in-store testing was the way to approach it in Ontario and in BC. If we look at the third group here, we have Professor Timothy DeWist, who was quite worried about advertising if we have laws that are a bit, too relaxed there. He gave some example of like some of the behavior of like, JUUL in the US that been contested. Obviously, we have to remember that like all of that happened, before JUUL, entered the Canadian market, if I remember correctly. And lastly, we had Professor David Sweener, which put forward that the problem should not be equated with the solution. That what was important here was to give alternative to smoker, to give them an accurate information and option to make decision. That we need to target them, convince them to stop, that require information, help, alternative, and to make sure that they are appropriately informed around the relative risk vis-a-vis the risk of smoking versus vaping. If we look at what the other documents that we had, the judge didn't spend too much time on it. He said he had 183 documents from all the parties. He did spend a bit more time on things that were quite closely related with the testimony of Denis Chouanière, which at the time at least was the director of tobacco product regulation in Ottawa. The Vaping Association brought some statements that are on the Health Canada webpage around the fact that vaping is less harmful than smoking. And I was just looking yesterday, and this page in French and in English is still up there. So anything that was in line with this seems to connect with the judge there in the way end up ruling. If there's some documents that he spent a bit of time on, we had a report from 2 Quebec cardiologists there who argued that it's not the first time an alternative nicotine product raised controversy, as doctors also opposed the use of nicotine patch back in the days because they thought they were dangerous to health. They're really slamming the fact that the media coverage is painting vaping as bad as cigarette, and that it doesn't put forward that this is a safer alternative, and that the Quebec government should take that approach that is focused on risk reduction or harm reduction as a public health approach, instead of trying to moralize smokers and tell them they should just quit. So what did the judge say? So you have 2 minutes left here. So the judge said the tribunal is not there to decide if the law is appropriate or not. He's there to decide if it's legal. He said he was quite convinced that electronic cigarettes are less harmful and that vaping could be a valid cessation method for smoking. So here's saying that vaping could be possible as a smoking cessation tool. If we look at some of the other stuff the judge said here, he felt that obviously e-cigarettes are effective for some people in their attempt to quit smoking and get rid of that unhealthy habit. That it was better to vape than to smoke tobacco. And in that sense, that vaping contribute to smoking cessation target and can help combat the negative effect of smoking. Obviously, for non-smokers, the best option is to abstain, which all the experts from all parties agreed on. Also, if we look at that, it's obviously it seems important to inform the client well and to advise them of the way of doing and using the device. And the judge obviously felt that depriving smokers of the possibility of trying in the shop had their integrity compromised there. And the judge did understand obviously the real and urgent objective there, but he didn't feel that it was justified by the defense here. So the judge did obviously find that the alleged provision deprived the smokers of an important means of making a successful transition, of eventually quitting and eliminating or reducing their tobacco exposure. They felt that the defense did not meet the burden in the case. And also he had some issues around the amalgamation of smoking and vaping around some of the statements that had to be made there. So in conclusion here, so if the Vaping Association won, why do the vape shops still have fruited windows like that? Well, unfortunately for the Vaping Association, the judge suspended the declaration of invalidity for a period of 6 months after the judgment. Then the Attorney General of Quebec appealed the decision. and the Quebec Court of Appeal give them the green light to hear their arguments. So that means that like for the vape shop, like they still have to abide by all the restrictions that were put in that law. And obviously they also had some hard time during the COVID-19 crisis that like had the CVA, among others, file for an injunction to be recognized as essential services, because that was done in other provinces. So if we just look at like, what next year, at some point, the Court of Appeal is going to hear the appeal. And what is at stake? Well, the Quebec Vaping Association is asking for everything that they didn't get. The CVA is actually just asking to reject the appeal. And the government of Quebec is asking, obviously, seeking to overturn the Superior Court decision, and that the court reject the incidental appeal of the QVA. So that's going to be it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascal. I mean, a fantastic overview, and it's fascinating, troubling at the same time when we look at the history of legal challenges of measures that restrict access to reduce risk options. We've had things like the Insight case for the safe injection site in Vancouver that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in a unanimous decision, it said that even though these are illicit drugs, that people have constitutional rights to life, that it was allowed to stay open. And yet we see a continuing tendency to bring forward laws that on the face of them are simply unconstitutional. Laws that say it's illegal to give people truthful information about relative risk, or as we've seen in Quebec and are being replicated across Canada, real impediments to people using products that have such huge health potential. I mean, when we're talking about over 40,000 deaths a year from cigarette smoking in Canada, and I think we have the potential here to rethink where we're going on policy to be consistent with our Constitution. I should remind everybody that we do have a few minutes for questions. If you want to use the chat function, send it a question and I'll ask it. And in the meantime, I will just enjoy asking my own questions. So Pascal, following up on the constitutional challenges, were you to be involved in this, what would you do differently in that case? And what would you be doing now in order to try to ensure that people in Quebec did have access to the options for getting off cigarettes?
Yeah, as I mentioned when I started the presentation, I do know people a bit at the CVA and the QVA. I think one thing that would have been great for them is they would have joined their action. I know the fact that they had 2 lawyers and 2 causes and 2 action there that end up being joined. Put a lot of pressure financially on the vape shop owners, and also you're kind of sending mixed message there, right? When we look at the appeal brief there, we have the CVA who decided to just ask the court to reject the appeal. So basically, try to come up and back the judge and say the judge was right about everything. And then you have the QVA who's coming up and saying the judge was wrong on the stuff they lost and the judge was right on the stuff they won there, right? So usually you want to take one of those 2 sides, because you don't want to undermine the credibility of the judge on the stuff that you won there. That's a bit like Donald Trump, who wanted stop the count where he's winning and keep counting where he's losing there. That's a bit challenging from a consistency perspective. So if they're able to get together and agree on some of those things and work together to push kind of one set of arguments, I think that definitely will have gone a long way at the appeal court. But we'll see.
Right. Thanks very much. I think the experience in Quebec is also fascinating because it ties into what Professor Sen was talking about on substitutability. And I know in looking at the sales figures for Quebec that there was far less of a substitution effect. The cigarette sales just were not falling as rapidly as they were in other provinces. And the decline in cigarette sales was particularly pronounced in markets where products like JUUL were able to go head to head with cigarettes in convenience stores. There was a great line actually from the US as to why was Altria, the biggest cigarette company there, so keen to try to buy into JUUL. And the explanation that was given to a Wall Street Journal reporter from an Altria official is, man, when these products come into a store, you ought to see what happens to cigarette sales. I mean, it's like a cancer. I think that sums it up very well. But Professor Sen, when we look at the substitution effect, what sort of data would we need to get, and how might we get it in order to better show the extent to which we can have substitution and the role of measures that are preventing it? And I'm thinking of things like South Korea, where they replaced 10% of the cigarette market very quickly with an alternative product, and then the government attacked the alternative product, and that trend stopped. Or the US, where as vaping products came into the market, the annualized rate of sales decline went from 2% to 8%, and now it's back to about 1% because of the attacks on vaping. And what might we need in order to get research, and what might we do to get people to pay attention to the research?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think we need more data, like the data that was provided to me. And so that's third-party data, right? It's not data generated by JUUL, it's a third party. And I think that having access to local level data on sales of different products and being able to see as the sales of, say, vaping products increase at the local level, do you see that cigarette sales are going down? I think that's pretty compelling evidence. And I was fortunate enough to get access to this data, but usually getting access to such refined local data is next to impossible. It costs money. I mean, for example, if you want to get data from Nielsen, right, it costs a lot of money. So I think from a research perspective, if there's some way for a government agency to purchase these data and make it available to researchers, that would be great.
And Maria, I'm going to put you on the spot to answer a scientific question that's come up. I know the answer, but I'm not supposed to be answering the questions. There's a question about, well, what about those oils in vaping products and the harm that they do to the lungs? That nobody's mentioned that. Do you want to address that issue? Because this is one that comes up fairly often, and I'm sure you deal with it on a continual basis with the people who come into your shop or don't come into your shop.
So the question is about the oils from vaping. So first of all, there is no oil in e-liquid. E-liquid is not an oil-based product. It is a water-soluble product. What we saw with the issues during the EVALI, which has now somehow vanished, is that it was black market cannabis products that were causing the issue. Because again, like, you know what, people wanted to make more money in the black market, so they would cut the THC oil with vitamin E acetate oil, and people would be consuming that. So the biggest misconception, and this is probably one of the things that is so heartbreaking for me, not to see people step up through public health to show a better understanding of vaping, is that vaping does not have oil in it. So you cannot, you can't create oil from water. So the damage from the lungs was from black market products where people were playing the role of scientists, where people were playing the role of trying to make a little bit more money and cutting it in with that vitamin E acetate oil because it looks like, I guess it's called shatter. It looks, or no, is it shatter or whatever those THC cartridges are? It looks like it has the same consistency of it, and the average person wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And that's where all that valley came up, and we don't see more conversation about that. And I hope that answers the ACO viewing sites question.
Thank you very much. I think picking up on what Chelsea Cox was talking about earlier on the overall approach to risk reduction and the similarities with these issues is actually fascinating, that the problem with the lung injury has been shown to have been caused by a vitamin E acetate added to illicit cannabis cartridges. That existed because cannabis in the United States is illegal. So there's no regulation of the product, and people can play fast and loose and do things that kill people. But then that is being used, or has been used by many people, to essentially say, well, because that was caused by people using a vaping product, we should ban the nicotine vaping products, meaning we will make them illegal, so that rather than being able to regulate it, we'll abdicate any responsibility for regulation and essentially lead it to a black market, which then raises the possibility of exactly these sorts of harms. And I think, as Chelsea was saying, and that there's this very strong division that we face on all of these issues of risk reduction, which Ellen Brandt, in a wonderful book called No Magic Bullet, talking about the history of venereal disease in America, describes as this constant tension between a rational scientific approach and a moralistic behavioralist approach. And I think we see that, and with all of we've heard from these speakers, it keeps being reiterated that there's good science that gets ignored. There's human rights issues that that many people choose to ignore. There are precedents from other areas of harm reduction that we're not following. And there's huge human carnage when you don't involve the people who are at risk. So the lessons I think are not only really important for where we go on dealing with issues of nicotine, because of course there's a lot of different ways you can deal with nicotine delivery and nicotinics, regardless whether it's vaping, but that are all massively less hazardous than using cigarettes. And people who are using cigarettes don't know that. And the parallel with other issues of risk reduction are just extraordinary in terms of, why do people get sick and die? Why are people dying of overdoses from opioids? Why did we have such trouble initially in dealing with issues of AIDS? You know, why do many countries still have huge problems on issues of reproductive health? Why was there the battle against auto safety or refrigeration, which largely got rid of stomach cancer? Why was there so much moralistic opposition to coffee, for heaven's sakes? And the parallels are there. There's much that we can learn. And the question is, how do we move into a much more rational basis on this? We were a little late starting, and I want to end us on time. So it means I'm going to have to shut up, which everybody knows me knows doesn't happen very easily. And anybody who has further questions, please get in touch with us, independent of this particular panel. Plus, there will be further sessions throughout the day on other aspects of risk reduction, including a session later today where I'll be chatting with the lead from Public Health England on tobacco, Martin Dockrell, about what has the UK done and how come they've gone in a different direction than many other countries and have been really much more successful in risk reduction. So thank you all very much for your attention here, and I look forward to the rest of the day and tomorrow, and to learning lots more. Take care. Move on to the next session.